Hello, everyone. David, I just moved your mic, so feel free to pull it back when you get up here. We have a lively audience here, online and in person. So welcome to the Writers Project. David Graham, our main speaker, but first I want to introduce an award-winning poet in her own right. And well, where did she go? Barbara Ungar, where did she go? She stepped out. She stepped out for a moment. Okay. All right. I'll read my intro for David and then we'll go back to Barbara. Okay. David Graham was born and raised in Johnstown, New York. He retired in 2016 from a career of teaching at several colleges and universities with 3 decades at Ripon College in Wisconsin. He directed, actually hosted the Visiting Writing Series for 28 years. He served on the advisory board for Verse Wisconsin, on the Poets Prize Selection Committee, and on the Wisconsin Poet Laureate Commission. He has been poetry editor for Blue Moon Review and poet in residence at the Frost Place I did know that, in the summer of 1996 in Franconia, New Hampshire. Where he also taught workshops several times. From 2016 to 22, he wrote a regular column in the journal Verse Virtual, Poetic License, on poetry, poets. Excuse me. He has given numerous presentations and readings in many states. His work has appeared in Poetry, American Poetry Review, Plowshares, Poetry Daily, Verse Daily, the Writer's Almanac, the Georgia Review, New England Review, Tri-Quarterly, Poetry International, the Iowa Review, Southern Poetry Review, and many other journals. Students, see if you can get him to submit something to Expression. Anthologies where he's found include James Crew's The Path to Kindness and How to Love the World, wonderful anthologies. Billy Collins's 180 More, really great one. Extraordinary Poems for Every Day. Seriously Funny, Are You Experienced? And a number of anthologies paying tribute to Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, Robert Frost, William Carlos Williams, Weldon Keys, Gerald Stern. There are spots up here if you're looking for a seat. You're welcome to come on up. Weldon Keys, Gerald Stern, rock music, dogs, and Jesus. To date, he has published 3 full collections of poetry, as well as 4 chapbooks, which are like half-size books, and also co-edited 2 anthologies, After Confession, Poetry as Autobiography, and Local News, Poetry About Small Towns, which I have not yet seen. His most recent collection is The Honey of Earth, which I left on my desk, by Terrapin Books, which collects poems on a wide variety of themes, including aging, family relations, love, art, small town life, and the complications of memory. The cover features a beautiful painting, Pasico Kitchen, by his lovely wife, artist Lee Shippey, sitting right up here, which depicts the Graham family's camp in the Adirondacks. The other most recent book is the anthology Local News, Poetry About Small Towns, co-edited with Tom Montag, MWPH Books in Fairwater, Wisconsin. Graham and his co-editor have both spent most of their lives living in small towns, and their anthology aims to chronicle the full complexity of small town America. And boy, do we know about that right now, right? Contributors include Ted Kuzer, former U.S. Poet Laureate, as well as other poets from Alaska to Florida. He and his wife live here in Glens Falls, and I've got to read just a snippet of some of the blurbs on Honey of Earth. Gray Jacobic said, reading the poems in David Graham's The Honey of Earth, I felt my heart break and then mend almost at once. And Sidney Lee, the famous poet from Vermont, wrote, "There I was, getting all set to cough up the usual clever blurb, when suddenly I thought, the hell with that. This is simply the best damn book of poems I've read in years."
Wow.
Dear reader, if you think I say so because David Graham was one of my earliest and favorite students, you're wrong. That his name is not up there with the many luminaries in which he is patently superior, to which he is patently superior. Well, again, that says more about the sad state of elite tastes than it does about this brilliant writer. But before we get to David Graham, I'd like to remind everyone, this is the birthday of our beloved late professor, Dr. Stuart Bartow, born on St. Patty's Day. He and I wore the green proudly. And in memory of Stu, we have our beloved Barbara Ungar, his partner, who is renowned and well-awarded poet in her own right, who's going to come and memorialize Stu a bit with some of his poetry. Come on up.
Thanks, Kathy. It's an honor to be here and to be reading with David Graham. I'm just going to read a couple of poems by Stu. One is from a very early chapbook called "The Stars Belong to No One" from 1994. And you'll see that even when he was in his 30s, he liked to imagine being dead. This is called "The Ghost." And I will be nothing but the wind whispering as it stirs in the reeds. Nothing more than the weightless wishes people send to one another without speaking, as someone far away thinks of you and makes you sneeze. The numbers you call, the presence felt from behind when alone in a room with white walls and many chairs. As the cat is cousin to the owl, I will be your shadow's brother, or the soulless body May gnats make in a swarm. I will be nothing but the wind pausing in the trees as it carries the voices of people we believe we remember, and the laughter of their children beating like quick black birds over the teeming earth, where ancestors listen, each of whom lies with one wing already unfurled. And then I'm going to read one more from Reasons to Hate the Sky, a more recent book. Didn't write political poems exactly, but I think this one speaks to our moment. And it reminds me, I found this out after he had died, that when he read Walden by Henry David Thoreau in college, he loved it so much that he immediately moved into the woods for a week. I got this from his college roommate. And in a sense, he never moved back. He was the happiest and the least materialistic person that I knew, which is really what that book is about. And I think you'll see that here. And there's also an allusion to the parable of Jesus where he says it's easier for a camel to squeeze through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. This is afterlife. Suppose, after all, the billionaires really can take it all with them. All their stuff, their portfolios, cash, luxury vehicles, mansions, somehow lugging all of it beyond gravity's range, somehow cramming all of it through the needle's eye, while the rest of us dead slobs simply sail off naked. Even guilt and desire molted like stale clothing. Most of us will arrive in heaven like birds released from cages. We'll be no larger than sparrows, soaring over the sprawling estates where the robed wealthy will be strolling their property. We'll perch on their gables, in their trees and bushes, shit on their lawns. For pleasure, we'll build ugly nests and mate inside them. Or we'll fuck on the cable lines and sing for no reason. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. And before David comes up, I just want to remind you that he brought some books and would be happy to sell and sign some of those puppies for you after his reading and question and answers. Come on up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you, Barbara, and the memory of Stu Bartow. Oh, I'm not coming up. Okay. Just let me know you can't hear me because I have some problem with my volume sometimes. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm so glad to see all of you out there. And I'm told there are some people online, so hi to those who are tuning in from far away. It's a wonderful to see everybody here. I see family, I see friends and colleagues, and it's just a wonderful feeling. Thanks to everyone for taking time to listen to me. What I'm going to do here is first I want to read a poem by someone else. And then I want to read maybe one or two of my early poems from early books. And then I'll go into the Honey of Earth, my most recent book. And if we have time, I'll give you some new stuff. Someone asked me when I said I was going to do this, of course you're going to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And I hadn't thought of that. So I scrambled, and of course it was easy. I thought I would give you a tiny little poem by William Butler Yeats. It's not one of his best ones, but I used to teach this one pretty regularly when I did workshops, and we would collectively learn this without the text. We would say it over and over until everyone had it, and I loved having the whole class recite this. And it is a St. Patrick's poem. It's called A Drinking Song. Wine comes in at the mouth, and love comes in at the eye. That's all we shall know for truth before we grow old and die. I lift the glass to my mouth, I look at you, and I sigh. Shall I read it again? Robert Bly always used to read twice when he had a small poem like this, and so I'm for Yeats and all the rest of you, A Drinking Song. Wine comes in at the mouth, and love comes in at the eye. That's all we shall know for truth before we grow old and die. I lift the glass to my mouth, I look at you, and I sigh.
A little louder, please.
Louder? Okay. I'll stand closer if I can. I once was able to recite that from memory, and I have to confess that I had a stroke 2.5 years ago, and I can't do that anymore. So I wish I could have read that, but I always have to do the look at the page, I'm afraid. So now I'm following Yeats and Stu Bartow, so lower your expectations a lot from there. This is a really old poem, but I've always loved this one, and I'll tell you why, but afterward. It was sponsored by something that my father used to do that I always loved. He would show home movies, and I liked, of course, seeing everybody. But I really liked it when he would rewind it and he would leave the projector on. And so we watched us all going backwards. And that was my favorite part. And so that deserved a poem, I thought. It's called Boys Backward and Forward. And it was prompted as well from a dream. This sentence, you take the language, I'll keep the fur. So just remember that. I will explain afterward. Boys backward and forward. Let's roll this whole movie backwards and see swimmers sucked along feet first by their thrashing wakes. Silly grins vanishing under inverted splashes, then feet and legs arcing up softly to the quivering board. Where there bounce a bit, then retreat. Where do they go? Those glistening selves, tanned and dripping with their yawning summers. Why are they climbing into cutoffs and t-shirts with such eager faces? Why would they scatter backwards down the driveway on wobbly bikes? Already, the June leafage is draining away into paler shades of May and April. The last freak snowfall mushrooms over brown grass before fluttering upward. Soon we will reappear, clumsy-legged among snowbanks, catching snowballs and disassembling them carefully back to our feet. We'll be just faces now, peering out from the hoods of our fur-lined parkas, and everyone will be busy swallowing cloud after cloud of indigestible words. So the language and the fur showed up there at the end. What happened was I did not dream that. My wife Lee dreamt that, and she said it out loud one time. And there was a time early in our marriage when I was working very early in the morning, and I would literally get up at 4 a.m. And then she had the night shift as a waitress. So when I got up, I wanted to talk to her, and she did not appreciate that. And so she would say various things, but this was all in her dream. She never, I would ask about her later, and she said, I don't remember that. So she was quite vocal about it. And I realized, oh yeah, you take the language, I'll keep the fur. She wanted me to just shut up, and she wanted to be cozy in her quilt. And whenever I read this, I have to tell you some of the other things that she said. She had a habit sometimes of giving me commands in her dream. Never would remember it. But one of my favorites was, don't eat thread. So, okay, I haven't. Sometimes if I was trying to talk to her, one time she said, note my concern. One time there was a question, she said, are you my avalanche? She never remembers any of these, so she says.
While you're there.
One time, I could sometimes get her to reply if she said something. So one time she said, take a walnut. And so I said, well, okay, then what? And she said, enjoy it. And then perhaps my all-time favorite was one time when the alarm went off, she sat up, straight up in her sleep and looked at the alarm and she said, we're sleeping here. That was easy to understand. Okay, that was a very early one. I think I'll move into the Honey of Earth. But this is one of the earliest ones I published in Honey of Earth. Kathy mentioned anthology about small towns, and I do write sometimes about the culture of small towns, I suppose. And you know, one of my early books, Revere said, you know, he writes all the time about small towns, so I thought I should write about other stuff too. But this is one that goes back to Wisconsin. One time we were first time to Baraboo, Wisconsin. Anybody ever been to Baraboo, Wisconsin? One of the things I've learned, and I used to sometimes ask students to tell me about, you know, where you came from and what were you proud of? Because I learned that every small town in this country is proud of something. You know, an actor was born there, or they have the prize cow, or yeah, anything. They all had something. And so we drove into Baraboo, Wisconsin, and there was a sign driving in, and it said, "Welcome to Baraboo, Wisconsin, the 54th best small town in the nation." And I thought, wow, that's just asking to write a poem about, because it had a lot of questions raised in my mind. How did they figure this out? And a number of years later, we drove into Littletown, was it New Hampshire? Littleton, New Hampshire, and they were number 10. I noticed there. So anyway, this is called Ode to Baraboo, Wisconsin, the 54th best small town in the nation. You have to love a town for a brag so elastic and middle-aged. You could live 53 lifetimes in a better place than Baraboo, as even Baraboo has to admit. And even if you're looking for fine food or a decent bookstore, if you hanker to dwell in celestial single digits, well, you'll need to rise considerably higher on the list. And if you seek a place that is not satellite to some other, maybe you'll settle in Chicago, or the second or third metropolis, or possibly Cleveland, the sixth most misunderstood, or head straight to Pittsburgh, the single most likely to feature in cop movie case scenes in need of big abandoned factories. Plenty of other small towns lost in the triple digits advance their own decent claims. My Johnstown, New York, remains the former glove capital of the world, main contributor to the 10th most polluted creek, and forever most apt to provoke visitors into saying, "Isn't this where they had that big flood?" No, it was not. But Baraboo is sticking to its guns, and you have to admire their faith, stretched so thinly down to the dozens, reaching for that statistical heaven where all places excel. You have to value a place that knows its limitations without giving an inch to the competition. Wily Auburn, Massachusetts at number 55, or ambitious Christiansburg, Virginia, temporarily stalled at 56, because some high school kids just TP'd the Baptist church. But still a great town, they're not afraid to tell you. Wonderful place to raise children. I'm not one to judge, of course, being merely the 10,011th best poet in the universe. But apparently I'm the very first to happen upon Baraboo, Wisconsin's shining truth. Imagine, to be not merely the circus capital of the land, not simply home to the International Crane Foundation, but one very good place for birds, clowns, and poets to gather up and count their dozens of blessings. I forgot to mention that that was what Nair Baraboo was known for. And I never went to the Circus Museum, I say, but the Crane Foundation is a wonderful place. They have, go there if you can. They have at least a pair of every crane entirely around the world. So you can see all these different cranes.
Like mechanical or
No, real ones.
bird?
Oh, yeah, you know, like sandhill cranes.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Whooping cranes and,
Had that.
and anyway, it's a wonderful place. So still in Honey of Earth, this is the most recent poem I wrote in that book. And I believe I wrote it right before we moved to Glens Falls. I was swapping daily poems with a former student of mine. And I like doing things like that because I really had no idea what to write about. And, I just, had to do something. And so I can't remember what he had written, but I got myself thinking about memory. And I was thinking about another boyhood memory, how, and I don't know if other people do this, but when I was a kid, I really loved to pretend to be sleeping when I wasn't. And sometimes my parents would come and check on me, and I would, I was very good at pretending to be asleep. So that, I thought I'd write a poem about that. It's called Listening for Your Name. As a father steals into its child's half-lit bedroom, slowly, quietly, standing long and long, counting the breaths before finally slipping back out, taking care not to wake her. And as that nightlit child is fully awake the whole time, with closed eyes, measured breathing, savoring the delicious blessing she couldn't name, but will remember her whole life. How often we feel we're being watched over, or that we're secretly looking in on the ones we love, even when they are far away, or even as they are lost in the sleep no one wakes from. What we know and what we feel can fully coincide, like love and worry, like taking care in full silence and secrecy, like darkness and light together. This is a poem I'd like to read that I don't believe I've ever read this aloud anywhere to anyone. So you'll be hearing this for the first time. The title, The Honey of Earth, comes from Wallace Stevens, and the passage in Stevens goes as this. He wrote, "The honey of heaven may or may not come, but that of earth both comes and goes at once." There are a number of poets who write whole books on a single theme, but I've never done that. So it's always a struggle to put together a manuscript that has something that might unify it. And for me, that was that passage. There's plenty of the sweetness of the honey of life. So a lot of poems about gratitude and praise and love and so forth. But you always have to remember it both comes and goes at once. So you have to balance that, or I have to balance that with poems of grief and pain and loss and all the rest of it. And so this is an example of that. It's a story, and it really happened. A guy on the Ohio Turnpike rest area once, he said this is the title and the first line. This is what he said. And that launched me into this. Just trying to get to Sandusky, he said. I'm not a carjacker or anything, he muttered. And in truth, I believed him. Nothing badass about his fairly new jeans, yellow polo shirt, and hair no shaggier than mine. Maybe 40. Still, he had the sidelong drift of a panhandler, and sure enough, out came his pitch. His sister in trouble in Sandusky, and he somehow without his billfold on the interstate, almost out of gas and still 100 miles to go. I didn't see any car, but I passed him a few bucks to make him go away, which he did without even a thank you, leaving me to appreciate the starkness of our exchange. He didn't pretend to be grateful. I didn't pretend to believe him. I don't expect he'll pay it forward either. Best I can do, I shrugged, handing him the few ones in my wallet. Not about to part with a 20, just to feel the buzz of being that kind of a man. But he was ambling away before I stowed my billfold back in my pocket. No doubt already seeking his next sucker. Or, who knows, a saint. For why wouldn't a saint ride the Ohio Turnpike, looking to improve the dusty miles between Cleveland and Toledo? Surely if I were a saint, I would often be found in Vermilion, Lorraine, Elyria, and Strongsville. I would know people in Huron and Wilmer. And yes, I would have a sister in Sandusky. She would live just off Grand Avenue of the Republic Highway and wouldn't have been down to the lake in years. That's something we talked about, a picnic at the lake sometime when we weren't so busy and had some leisure time, some nice sunset night in July. A trace of autumn cool in the breeze, and a six-pack, good and gold to work on. But then Sandy got so sick, and it was all I could do to get over there once or every couple 3 weeks to help mow the yard and bring a few groceries. But mostly just to talk, sipping our coffees, deep talk, like we haven't done since we were kids. And now it seems time might be limited. And anyway, neither of us talks anymore about heading down to the lake. Maybe that's sad. Or maybe, as Sandy would say, it's just realistic. But in any case, she won't see another sunset off those waters in this lifetime. And we both feel it. Can you spare a 20 for that, pal? That's my story. I'm gonna, we're still in the honey of earth spot here. I want to read a poem. It's an elegy, or I call it a pre-elegy for my mother, because I wrote it before she died. And I could see, we could all see that it was coming. And I wanted to write a kind of a portrait of my mother. And I wrote a two-part poem. I'm just going to read part 2 here, but the overall title is Vinegar and Fizz. And you get a sense of her personality, I hope, from this. One of the things I mentioned in the poem is the war. And in her case, excuse me, the war was World War II, of course, for her. And she was a college at Skidmore, and she dropped out and enlisted in the Army. in the war, and that surprised everyone, including all her family. But she was extremely proud of her service for the rest of her life, and often mentioned it. So that shows up here. This is a scene. This is part 2 of the poem, where she started showing signs of memory problems. The doctor settles opposite her in a straight chair, looking kindly and earnest, and I can tell what's coming. He asks her name, and of course she snorts, "You know that." Yes, he does. But then he inquires if she can say what season. She looks around the ward craftily. Decorated tree, tinsel, cartoon snowflakes stuck to the windows. It's almost Christmas. What are you getting me? Next, he wonders if she knows the year. She glares into his face, allows a sullen pause. Then, 1937, she says. And so it is. She's going on 16, a girl ready to burn and roam, nobody's fool, a spitfire, all vinegar and fizz. The war is just a vague mist on the horizon. This year has a gleaming, sun-scoured sound. 1937. The train is about to leave the station for the one and only time. She'll be damned if she won't be on it and ride far from home. So I hope you get a sense of her personality. When my father died, I had a series of dreams where he came to visit me. And they were always very comforting. It's a wonderful time in a way, being able to hear his voice and so on, even though like dreams, the way dreams are, they didn't make any sense. But there, I could say, oh, he came to hear me. He came to see me. So when Mom died, I was ready. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and then I kind of got impatient. And I wrote this poem. And it's called Impatient Elegy. This time after she had died, actually. My mother sure is taking her sweet time coming back for a visit. I thought the dead were supposed to linger a good while, pull up a chair by your sleeping form, and murmur soft truths like leaves touched by the wind. But not Mom. She boarded her train early, clutching her one-way ticket, and didn't even wave out the window as it pulled away. She'll eventually write a funny postcard, I imagine. Maybe send a clipping every once in a while with no note, but have you seen this? Scrawled sort of hastily in the margin. I know she'll enter my dreams someday, but it won't be on tiptoe, and she won't come to lay another blanket over me or gaze in wonder at my graying face. No, she'll be reading some book and laughing. She'll stop short, look a bit surprised to see me, then continue reading, favorite passages aloud. She'll mix her drinks stronger than mine, and if I remark at it, she will just look at me with that face, that I've been to war face, that she spent her whole life perfecting. So that's a new poem, and I think that has to be part 3 of that poem I was reading from after she passed. A number of you, many of you know this, but those of you who don't know about it, you may be able to tell that my stroke, which was August of 2022, it messed up a lot of things, including language. And at the beginning, I couldn't write anything, much less poetry. And my speech therapist, they suggested what I should do is keeping a journal. And I could copy poems by other people and other texts by hand. It's very important to not just type it or something, but write it on by hand. And then I should read them aloud to practice. So I could practice my writing as well, and my handwriting and my speech. So they all said this, and I thought, I'm way ahead of you. I've been writing in a journal for my whole life, so I can do this. It took me a long time. It took me probably 6 months to be able to actually write a poem again. And I'm still at work on it, but I wanted to read here. This is the first poem that I managed to write about the recovery, going from the hospital to home. And what I had been doing there in my journal was I couldn't write a poem at that point, but I would write a line, maybe I would remember something, or I had filled with these little snippets in my journal. And I finally cobbled together some of these journal entries and called them snapshots. So this is called Stroke Snapshots. And there are 8 tiny little bits here of snapshots, I guess. So stroke snapshots. Number 1. In an hour, a day, my sentences unravel till nouns, verbs, prepositions jumble like loose Scrabble tiles. I'll just have to learn again. Words on the blackboard, erased at night, then writing it again tomorrow. 2. The moon glinting on a parked car in the hospital lot, engine still warm. Number 3. Someone laughing, passing my room at midnight or in my sleep. 4. The blood pressure cuff holds my arm like a mother, dutiful and absently. 5. Home from the hospital, I flush a spider for her, like a guy who can still do things. 6. I meet my aphasia friends at the support group. We introduce each other again every month. 7. Clouds flirt with the full moon the way my brain goes dim, then bright, then dim. And finally, number 8. I'm back, walking at night in hopes of sleeping dream-free. In the wind, I hear the brittle whisper of last year's leaves scattering across the street. They're restless, and almost the voices I hear some bits of a past life. So I have a whole series of these poems as I'm trying to process, I suppose, the recovery. But I'll move to something else here. You may have heard there's a new president these days. And this one was actually written before then, but it sort of seems, this seems to be a little poem about democracy, I think, or maybe it's about impatience. Anyway, it's a little tiny little thing called 21st Century Song. 3 cars in a row, dark, sporty jobs, whoosh, out of the parking lot. Some meeting must have just let out. Alone at each wheel, A man in a suit, cell to his ear as he drives one-handed, all talking fast, perhaps to each other, each face angry as a match head. And then the election happened. And like everybody else, I suppose, I've been trying to figure out what's happening. And I wrote this a day or a few days after the election in November, and trying to figure out what democracy might mean going forward. So this is called a note on democracy. My neighbor flies 2 flags, one on each side of the porch, jutting out over the sidewalk. He never brings them in at night, as my soldier father always said was essential. Something about honor, something about ritual. The flags fly in rain or whirlwind. They flutter and ripple in the dark as the country does, unsupervised and unseeing. On holidays or working days, nothing to distinguish them anymore. I guess they're all working days, even unto the night shift and double shifts forever. The neighbor's dog keeps barking all day long and most of the night, as though she knows nothing better, as if her rightful owner would come any day now and carry her away. There is no such God, and by now she seems not to believe it herself. Barking is what she has instead. It's sort of a song, a comfort that the unsupervised and unseeing must need in the dark. And that's as far as I've gotten on this thought, I suppose. I think I'll read maybe 2 more. Is that, am I good on time?
Yeah.
And then whatever happens. Mention Ripon, Wisconsin, which was a town of about the same size as Johnstown, New York, as a matter of fact, about 7,000 people. And we lived there for 30 years, just down the block from the oldest graveyard in the town. And I walked our dogs many times through that cemetery. I should mention just one thing for this poem. It was, for the Midwest, it was a very old graveyard. I mean, we have really old graves in the East. But for the Midwest, there were a lot of people there who were born in the 1700s. Well, not a lot, but some. And, you know, I got to, in my walks through this place, I thought a lot about those people and how did they live and what did they think about and so forth. So this is called Sounds Like Singing. No one's guilty in the old graveyard. All are forgiven by the frost, the wind, the long rains of spring. Every year, the woodchuck sits on this hill, squinting, then whistles a sharp warning when the dead go wandering through. All are redeemed by the clouds, their shadows quick as thoughts across the crim grass. No one's singing much, except some finches who are just passing through. No one's listening, not even the dead children who never glimpsed our century or the one before. All are lost. No one's at rest because everything, even the calm air, is just passing through. Shadows lengthen, then shrink and lengthen again, and the wind only sounds like singing. Well, that's kind of a downer. But walking through a old graveyard for 30 years, you have thoughts about a lot of those things. This is the last one, and my most recent one. It's one of the, I always say this is one of those grace poems, by which I mean, it seemed to come out of nowhere. And it was written very rapidly, and I didn't really have any idea what I was going to say. And I finished it and I thought, wow, a poem has happened. And I have no idea where that came from or how did they do it or any of that. But I know what I was doing was I was reading some poems by Jim Harrison, and this passage jumped out at me. He wrote, "Try to remember all the birds you've heard, but didn't see. This is called grace." And so I was thinking about things that I have heard and didn't see. And of course, I thought of, by then, my mother has appeared in my dreams. So then I wrote this. It's called, This is Called Grace. Last night, my mother's voice reached me from some cloud or over the foggy water of an Adirondack morning. Then the sound of her oarlocks creaking as she rowed back from the dawn's trip around Pine Island. In the dream, I went down barefoot to the shore to greet her, as I never did when she lived. My dreams then were clotted and graceless, feverish, with a face I could only see in the water, myself, or the darting shadows of trout or perch, gone before I could relish. But grace returns with a voice much missed, even complaining repeatedly when it turned to the hard years. Even then, though I didn't know it was grace, and I wouldn't have called it then, or linked it with the deep fogs she must have found vanishing and confusing as she rode and never reached me at the shoreline. Thank you. I'm told I should stand here and see if anyone has a comment or a dear Lord, not a question. But, or nothing, or there's also food in the back. So they're, balancing those things. It's Professor.
Well, Professor, um, how have you experienced the changing of or developing of your voice over decades, over time? You started writing pretty young, started publishing pretty young.
Mm. I'm terrible at answering that question. And of course, I've thought about it, but I think at first I was trying to, dazzle myself or anybody else. And so I really wasn't very interested in my actual life. But I was, in some of the early poems, I think, what's that about? And I liked them and they were being published, but over time, I think the one thing I can notice is I got more interested in reality or something like that. And I found myself pulling more of things from my own experience, my family, history, real things. And some of those early poems reminds me of looking at my high school yearbook and thinking, who was that guy? I mean, I recognize him in a way, but boy, what strange clothes he wore then. That sort of thing. That's the best I can say, I guess. So don't ask me what some of those poems in the first book were about. I was just going for sound, I think.
Can you talk a little more about the recovery from the stroke and how long did it take you to get to a point where you were realizing you were writing again?
Well, I was trying every day, but yeah, I was failing pretty much. I think it was about 6 months before I could actually write a poem, not necessarily a good one, but I could say, well, that's a poem I've done. And it was daily, I know. Um, I always want to mention that in the stroke support group that I go to, people say this often, which is every stroke is different because everyone has very different issues compared to, well, it all has to do with what exact part of your brain was damaged. And unfortunately, in my case, it damaged my language lobes. And I could walk and do things, some people, are, excuse me, some people get paralyzed permanently and so on.
It's
But
just the piece.
yeah.
That's-
But so I had to relearn. I mean everything. Spelling. I used to be a great speller, and it all went, and I couldn't memorize again. I still have trouble with pronouns. I'm always. It's very embarrassing because everyone wants to know what are your pronouns. And I get them wrong all the time just because my brain is not working. I work at it, but anyway. So it's continuing, but I made enormous improvement over those six months, really. How did I do it? Well, I have to credit the speech therapists. They were wonderful. But they gave me homework and I did the homework. And I read a lot of poems and wrote them out by hand and read them aloud 20 times for Lee. And she was very supportive of all this.
A real question. I loved your poetry. Let me just say, I loved hearing you reading it deeply.
Thank you.
But I also knew you as a photographer because when we go to the art show, and I said, "Are you doing any photography?" And you said, "Now I'm in poetry." How do the two speak to each other? And I know, so because I also really found your photography very good.
I take a lot of photos just for fun. I consider myself as an amateur, but a lot of people have asked about, do you ever put poems with photos? And I really, that's too much for my brain. And even before the stroke, I thought, no, I can't. It's hard enough to write a poem.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to take a good photo, but putting them together, oh, that's too hard. And fortunately, I live with an artist, so she has appeared on the covers of several of my books. So she's my. I don't need to write or I don't need to have. I don't need to have photo on my cover. But I think about and every now and then I'll write a poem about a photo, but it's never one of mine.
Yeah.
That appeals me. Lots of people love to write poems about photos or paintings or whatever, and for me, it's I'm not very good at it, I guess. I have written at least a couple poems about Lee's works, so there's that. Always judge the books by their covers. I say they're great covers.
Students, go for it.
Yes.
I have a personal question. Are you still waiting on that dream from your mom, that dream visit?
Well, she's appeared in my dreams, but she's never really that interested in me. Uh, I think she's busy doing other things in the other world, I think. But yeah, I mean, that last poem I read, I had a dream and I don't remember anything about it, but just this moment of hearing her voice at the lake. And it was always, often it was very foggy, and I would hear her coming back from her morning row, and it just, that appeared. I think her voice is what I remember. Yeah. She was feisty, always feisty, and proud of it. Yeah.
Like write about grief without it being sort of like a jumbled emotional word vomit.
I do. I mean, that's exactly what I write in my journal. It's all jumbled and awful and so forth. And somewhere in that jumble, if I go back at it, maybe another week or not even another day or another month, I can usually find some thread. I can say, oh, I can build on that. Most of it has to get cast away. That's sort of the way I write anything. I write, and then I come back later and figure out, is there any filling in this, pie, or not, almost always there's a line, a phrase, a metaphor or something I can say, oh, I can build on this. That's how I do it. I don't know how other people do it, but I guess I know friends who write, and they just don't write every day. They just wait until something moves them, and then they write this beautiful poem. And I think that'd be nice. I have to, write and write and write until something, surprises me or something. There's a wonderful book by Richard Hugo. This is for aspiring poets. It's called The Triggering Town. And I quoted this in every workshop I ever taught. He was describing the great golfer, Jack Nicklaus, who was making an amazing shot one day. And supposedly someone in the audience said, oh, that was a lucky shot. And then Jack Nicklaus supposedly said, I notice the more I practice, the luckier I get. I say supposedly because I don't think anybody would actually say that to actually Jack Nicklaus, great golfer. But it's a great sentiment. I don't know how to do it any way other but just open the journal and start spewing something, and then something will happen eventually. But if I just stare and look out the window, basically nothing happens except I get hungry. Just tell my students, you can't improve a blank page. You have to have something to mold it with. You can. So start with something.
Time for about one more question.
Yes.
After your stroke, have you had difficulty finding proper words for certain situations?
Yes, I do. I've probably done this right here. I have a kind of a mild aphasia where, one of the things is I reach for words that I already knew and it's not there. And I either can come up with a synonym or I can't finish my sentence, unfortunately. But I'm lucky. I'm luckier than a lot of people at the stroke support group that I see. Some people can't speak at all. At least I can. Does that answer your? Yeah. You have to take my portrait.
You gotta get in it though.
You want me to take one of yours, of you?
I'm good.
Thank you. Let me run up here real quick.
A big thank you to David and Barbara. I know it's not hard, not easy, but you did a great job. And we'll always remember Stu, always, always. And thank you all for coming. Please get some refreshments, and I have a couple announcements. Forgive me for horning in on your territory here. A couple of announcements. On April 7th, we have Philip Chase, who's a fantasy writer, has a trilogy out that he's self-published. So you many students who are into self-publishing and fantasy will enjoy this, I think. That's April 7th. April 28th, we have Megan Mayhew Bergman, professor from Middlebury College. She's an environmental journalist and a fiction writer. And I'm very much looking forward, she's a feminist too. So I'm very much looking forward to her presentation. And then on Wednesday, April 30th, any of our students who are graduating in the Creative Writing Associate of Arts program will be doing a reading in here. And sometime to be scheduled, sometime next month, which is National Poetry Month, I've only told Nancy and Pete, but our poetry machine is in. It was my dream before I left here to get us a poetry machine, which if you don't know, is not AI, thank God, but is an old-fashioned gumball machine that you fill the little plastic gizmos with poems from the public domain or from students or faculty. So I'll be asking you for your favorite poems and professors, please think about contributing some of your favorite student poems. And sometime in April, that will be coming up. Thank you all.
Thank you.